Alright, so today we are testing the RX 6600 XT in Diablo 4. Now let's just go over the settings here quickly and let me just get rid of that. So currently we're playing at 1080p, we're playing on the Ultra preset, and we'll be testing at 1080p and 1440p, maybe 4K depending on how it goes. I know I always say that because I'm not entirely sure how these GPUs would perform at 4K, but let's start. Before we actually do that, I'm just in a dungeon, lights watch. The reason for that is I just want the gameplay to be consistent during benchmark runs. I don't test in the open world because there are other players there, so it is a random aspect that I don't want introduced in the benchmark runs, but I will teleport to the city so that you can see what the frame rate is like there as well. Alright, so let's just start our benchmark counter there. Hopefully it's big enough for you. It should be. This is pretty much what I usually do. Now, this is at Ultra with the HD texture pack installed as well. There are one or two stutters actually that I did notice just on my way to this dungeon. And I mean, it's definitely not the end of the world. It seems to stutter once or twice, and then it seems to be okay for that specific area. We'll just be playing a little bit. Hopefully there's some fighting. And there does seem to be some. Alright, but as you can see, our average frame rate is around 100 frames per second here, which is pretty good for this GPU. It's a very affordable GPU, especially if you buy it second hand. And personally, it's one of the GPUs that I would highly recommend for 1080p gaming. I know there's a lot of talk about 8GB not being good enough for 1080p anymore, which is fine. There are some issues when you enable ultra textures, etc. But in Diablo, it seems to be doing quite okay. You can see that our VRAM usage is below 5GB, and as I said, this is with the HD texture pack enabled as well. So all in all, it's doing pretty well. You can see that our frame rate does drop into the 80s here when it's in a more open area, but still it's a very good experience. Diablo, you don't really need a very high refresh rate, and this is without any upscaling tech. So if this is not acceptable to you, you can always try and enable FSR, which would also help. And I almost died there. Now, I must say I am pretty biased. The Diablo is one of my favorite franchises. Diablo 3 was a little bit of a disappointment, but I did play it quite a lot on the PS3, mostly co-op with my wife. We spent many hours playing couch co-op, and it was a lot of fun. Alright, so let me just heal up here, and then we'll just go down to high, and after that we'll go to 1440p. Alright, we're just now on the high preset, and not much has changed. We've got SSAO quality that went down 1, shadow quality has gone down, and texture quality has gone down. And that's pretty much what we can see from the options menu. Alright, let's just start our frame rate counter here, and we gained around 20 frames per second in this specific area. Remember, this is where we got around 80 frames per second, so this is a very welcome bump to our frame rate into the 120s here. So if you do have a 120 hertz panel and you want to make full use of that, then maybe this would be the better setting to use. The game still plays 100% fine at Ultra, but as I said, if you do want a high refresh rate experience, then maybe these are the settings that you should consider. I don't usually play this bad, you only have my word for that, but it's kind of different when you benchmark and play at the same time, because I'm not a native English speaker, so I need to concentrate on exactly what I'm saying. That distracts me a little bit from the gameplay, but my gameplay should not be the main focus here. You should just focus on the performance numbers, and I think we might die here. So before we actually interact with this adventurer, let's move up to 1440p. Alright, we're now at 1440p. We are still on the high preset. Now, one issue when it comes to changing resolution is that you only have a windowed or windowed full screen, and neither of these options actually allow you to change the resolution. So you have to change your desktop resolution. Alright, so 1440p on the high preset, and a pretty intense fight should start soon. But yeah, you can see that even at 1440p on the high preset, we are still using less than 5 gigabytes of VRAM, which is once again pretty good, right? So I must confess, I recently switched over to a Frost build. I used to play Lightning. I do enjoy the Lightning, but Frost seems to be a little bit better when it comes to AoE. Alright, and now we're pretty much done with this fight. Alright, it wasn't as bad as I expected it to be, and our frame rate average was 76 for that fight, which is once again pretty good, and we had very little stutter actually. I didn't really keep an eye on the frame time graph, but just judging from the 0.1% and the 1% low numbers, it seems like it fared pretty well. Alright, now let's see what happens at Ultra. Right, we're still at 1440p, just now on the Ultra preset. There are all the rest of the settings. And I'm pretty sure we should be able to maintain 60 frames per second. Maybe not all the time, but most of the time. And that's pretty strange. Our VRAM usage has gone down, right? It's now 3.5 gig. But it should creep up. I think it'll go to around 6 gig. On the RTX 4080 that I tested on earlier, I didn't make a video on that yet, but that crept up to around 9 gigabytes of VRAM usage. It does seem to be the case where this game likes to use pretty much as much VRAM as is available. It's not really an indication of what the minimum should be, because as I said, on the 4080 it uses about 9 gigabytes of VRAM, and now we're still using around 5 gigabytes of VRAM, right? And still no real stuttering going on here. Sure, our frame rate is not very high, so 1440p Ultra is probably not the best setting for this GPU in this game, but it's still a very playable experience. Just not something that I would recommend. Alright, but I think that's going to be it for 1440p Ultra. Let's just enable FSR and see if it can actually get us a constant 60 frames per second. So this game actually supports FSR, DLSS and XeSS, which is pretty good. I actually have an ARC A750 on the way, so I'll be testing that with XeSS pretty soon. So if you want to see that, hit that subscribe button, maybe even hit that bell notification button if you want to be notified when that video goes live. As I said, it should be soon. It'll probably go live just after this video, maybe a day after, depending on when the card actually arrives. But now you can see we are back into the 80s with FSR and back into the hundreds here. So getting pretty much what we had at 1080p Ultra, which makes sense because FSR on quality is pretty close to 1080p, right? It's a little bit lower, but there is some overhead, so we're getting around the same frame rate as at 1080p Ultra. And our VRAM usage is very low. It's sitting at 2.8 gigabytes of VRAM used at the moment. I mean, that will creep up the more you play the game. I've seen some tweets on Twitter where people claim that there's a memory leak issue. I really don't think that's the case, because the RTX 4080 has got 16 gigabytes of VRAM, obviously, and with that it stopped its usage at around 9 gigabytes at 1440p. It did go up to around 14 gigabytes at 4K, but no performance degradation whatsoever. And then you get the 4090 where the usage creeps up to around 22 gigabytes. Once again, I don't think it's a memory leaking issue, because otherwise the 4080 would actually run out of VRAM if the 4090 uses up to 22 gigabytes of VRAM. Alright, but before we say goodbye, I just want to test the frame rate in the town quickly. So let's just go to Kiowa Shard. Right, so if you remember, we had around 84 frames per second in the dungeon there just before we exited. Now let's just reset our numbers here, and we're getting around almost 100 frames per second here in town. So it doesn't really matter where you are, you're getting a very good experience with this GPU. Whether it's outside, inside, in the dungeon, in town, doesn't really matter. The frame rate is very acceptable for this GPU. I'm not going to be wasting your time too much on this. I just wanted to show you what the frame rate difference is between the dungeons and the town. And as you can see, you actually get a higher frame rate in town. Alright, on that note, we're going to end this video. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. And as always, we hope to see you in the next one.